To finish the Stalingrad experience, we can watch. Let's watch this, and then I finish the whole Stalingrad topic on my channel.
The Battle of Stalingrad.
Thank you, Tristan. There's the prime. I told you, bro.
One of the most merciless and destructive battles throughout history.
Thank you.
Resulting in nearly 2 million total casualties between August 23rd, 1942 through February 2nd, 1943. The German siege resulted in a decisive victory.
They should have let me play, man.
Although at the cost of over 1 million Russian casualties.
1 million. Can you imagine that? 1 million. Can you? That's one battle, one city, 1 million dead, just on one side. Why do people die in wars? Because of fucking politician bullshit, right? You have Hitler in Berlin, you have Stalin, and just because of all these ego-driven psychopaths, so many people die. Like, man, the normal people killing each other for all this bullshit. It's the saddest tragedy in the human history. There's no bigger tragedy. How many of these dead soldiers had good ideas, could have brought the human race into progress, man?
Such a significant industrial city have damaging effects on the Soviet Union in its entirety. But to seize a city named after the Soviet head of state himself would serve as a great benefit for German propaganda and psychological warfare. By this point, the Germans had already captured a large portion of today's Ukraine and Belarus, but had failed a prior attempt to get a foothold in Russia's western city of Moscow in the winter of 1941 through 1942. Still, despite the triumph of the Soviets...
What I sometimes wonder, sounds weird, what exactly, literally exactly, has to happen that an army can progress anymore? Like, why exactly, militarily speaking, didn't Germany get into Moscow? What exactly happened? Like, there's a street and you can't take it or something? Logistics. No, I mean, really, a real-life story. What exactly happened? Logistics. So, yeah, you wait a bit, you wait for supply, and then you... So you're telling me it's just they're standing there like, oh, we have no ammo. Let's just go back again.
At Moscow, their Red Army had been worn down.
Food, winter uniforms, and no fuel.
Men and weaponry. With apparent confidence that the damaged troops of the Soviets would be unable to stop another advance so soon, the German Chancellor called for Operation Blue.
The German Chancellor? What? The German Chancellor? I've never heard that. German Chancellor in World War II. Thank you, Ginky. Case Blue was the German Armed Forces name for its plan for the 1942 strategic summer offensive in southern Russia. The goal was to capture the oil fields of Baku.
The operation was decided to be carried out by the Blue German Army.
Blue is doing insane right now. Oh, Blue, Alter. The Panzer Corps just shitting on people. Beautiful kills by Blue. I have to reapply Blue. Blue is the one true god. Blue will save the world, man. I mean, I shouldn't say that. But you wouldn't call him the Chancellor.
But as the offense began on July 9th, 1942,
Blue Army, guys.
Germany decided to tweak their plan. Instead of capturing Stalingrad before moving on to conquer the rest, the German Führer wanted to aim for both goals simultaneously. Army Group South was divided
Hitler wanted
into
to humiliate Stalin and make him feel
and
ashamed by
Army
capturing the city that had his name.
The first being led by Field Marshal
it's all ego,
Wilhelm
right? It's all
List,
ego
and the
bullshit,
latter,
man.
the Panzer Army, led by Hermann Hoth, was reassigned from Army Group B to go assist Army Group A. Meanwhile, Joseph Stalin made his first major move in response to the building threat. In an extreme reaction to the inevitable clash with Germany, the Soviet leader issued Order Number 227, which is often referred to as the Not One Step Back Order. The order declared that no Russian fighter shall retreat or back down for any reason unless given an explicit order.
That's
those
fucking insane, there.
Which he deemed
Imagine the feeling that, man. You have to fight, and if you retreat, you get shot by your own people. Unimaginable. You guys complain about your Roman, man. Imagine being in that shit.
Citizens of Stalingrad, as he claims that his troops would fight even harder with the knowledge that they had so many civilian lives to protect. Those troops consisted of the 21st, 62nd, 63rd, and 64th Armies, alongside the 8th Air Army, all commanded by Semyon Timoshenko. The Stalingrad front responded quickly to the German...
The order was only issued to commanders and not normal soldiers. So, Silver Wardog, you are telling me that if a basic, normal Russian soldier was retreating, he would not have any consequences. But that seems rather
As Hermann Hoth and his men began to...
The next myth is about the so-called blocking detachment. This one achieved widespread notoriety with the movie Enemy at the Gates, which depicted these detachments gunning down Soviet conscripts in case they retreated. This depiction is an extreme misrepresentation. The duties of these detachments were to prevent soldiers from fleeing and retreating or leaving their units without authorization. As such, their duties were similar to that of a military police. The Soviets did execute far more of their own soldiers than other countries, yet blocking detachments were rarely used to gun down their own men. Instead, they usually sent soldiers back to their units and/or the front.
Germany's 6th Army had pushed the
That's the guy who
Soviet
gives you a lot of army
62nd
XP.
and 64th armies to the outskirts of the city as the German Luftwaffe dropped repetitive bombs on Stalingrad, quickly laying waste to most of its wooden buildings and structures over the first 48 hours. Many civilians were killed as the action began, yet some proceeded to work in the factories that had not been demolished by the bombs, such as the Stalingrad tractor factory, which continued to produce Soviet T-34 tanks as the struggle raged on.
That's crazy.
Other civilians who survived the first days were forced to build trenches and fortifications for the Soviet troops. By this point, all Russian forces were diverted to the bank of the Volga River as the Germans seemed to take an early upper hand and eventually push the Soviet troops back to where they only held a small portion of land along the river. The German airstrikes made this position difficult, as ships coming through the Volga were the Soviets' only way of supply, and their own air forces stood no match for Wolfram von Richthofen's Air Fleet 4. Despite continuous aerial reinforcements on the Russian side, the Luftwaffe held undeniable control of the airspace over the city. The Soviets' 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment was now under immense pressure to fight off the increasing German air attacks.
Are you telling me there's 1,000 regiments?
The German 16th Panzer
These
Division
fucking
advanced from the
always.
ground. Despite having zero training to deal with ground assaults, the 1077th fighters forced the Panzers to engage with them shot for shot, until the latter was finally able to disable or destroy all 37 of the Soviets' anti-aircraft guns. The Germans were shocked to then discover that they had been fighting an entire regiment of women the entire time. Meanwhile, civilian militia groups, made up of any men or women who were not still working in the factories, were sent out, poorly equipped, to join the defensive fight. Small units on the ground for both sides now engaged in close combat all throughout Stalingrad, fighting over blocks and buildings, passing control back.
I always try to imagine how that must feel like, man, to be in that.
Attempted to launch multiple offenses against the Germans, but were beaten down, particularly by the Luftwaffe.
I guess though, if you don't get the shakies and you go, oh, you're just like in shock and you kind of just go with it. This is what I have to do, and you just fucking do it, man.
German troops repeatedly failed to take key crossing points along the Volga and were only able to hold the south of Stalingrad thus far. The 14th Panzer Division and 305th Infantry Division on the German side carried out brutal assaults on the Soviet factories, some of which were still
they became an epic regiment. They unlocked that. Look at that.
Back ruthlessly against the Soviets' 138th Rifle Division, led by Colonel Ivan Ludnikov. By November 8th, the German Luftwaffe had been spread thin, as important units from Air Fleet 4 had to be diverted to face the Allies in North Africa, while the Axis side had also brought in pilots from the Royal Romanian Air Force, who had destroyed roughly 61 Soviet aircraft in Stalingrad. The Germans suffered the consequences of having to string their air force across multiple battle zones. Additionally, by mid-November, the Russians launched a new counteroffensive,
well played, minus 20 orb.
Operation Uranus,
Adios.
planned by Generals
Operation Uranus?
Georgy Zhukov, Alexander Vasilevsky, and Nikolai Voronov. Beginning on November 19th, the attack was organized in two spearheads, both north and south of the German forces, and took the latter completely by surprise. Strategically, the Soviets opted not to strike against Germany's 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army, but instead aimed for the weaker flanks, less protected.
Look at the Italians! Hey, I'm coming! Oh no! Oh, I need to go home!
A demoralized team of Hungarian, Romanian, and Italian troops The Germans' weaker flanks proved
GG.
easy to penetrate for the Soviets, and both spearheads were reunited on November 23rd.
That's when you run home to Matilda and hide in the basement.
In Stalingrad, a plea was made to the German Chancellor to allow a retreat to reunite with the German forces outside the city, but the armies stuck in Stalingrad were simply told to stand and fight. Because the focus wasn't taking every part of the city, the flanks were not strengthened enough. Winter had now arrived, and supplies,
oh, that must have sucked, man, being in there, man. That must have sucked so hard.
Was supposed to supply the ground forces, but failed to deliver enough supplies. Finally, as December ticked on, Germany's chancellor ordered to bring together a special army corps to rescue their fellow fighters from Stalingrad. In a disastrous move, the Chancellor refused again to let the trapped forces break through the encirclement. Manstein and his army were simply unable to advance through the Soviet line, which now launched Operation Saturn, intending to tighten their grasp around the enclosed Germans. Germany's Chancellor again told his men to keep fighting, to the death even if need be.
Because he didn't give a fuck, right? That idiot didn't give a fuck if he died. He was just craziest motherfucker.
The German Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, who had been prompted along with the reminder from his chancellor that no field marshal had ever surrendered, reached his limit on January 31st. Paulus, accompanied by 22 of his generals, gave himself up. 2 days later, the only remaining 91,000 troops of the German 6th and
91,000
surrendered themselves
to the
Soviet Union. Of the 91,000 men who surrendered, only a few thousand would ever return home, while the rest died in Soviet prisons or labor camps. 250,000 German and Romanian bodies were recovered by the Russians after the battle ended, and the total number of casualties between the German, Hungarian, Romanian, and Italian troops from Stalingrad is believed to number more than 900,000. Roughly 40,000 civilians perished as well, which was a predictable outcome in response to Stalin's
unimaginable, man.
Evacuated citizens before the combat took place, and others being forced to fight.
So unnecessary.
The answer to why there were so many casualties in the Battle of Stalingrad is likely a combination of many
Do I look more jacked?
For one,
I don't.
the civilian involvement in the conflict played a role. Another factor was Stalin's not one-step back order, which prevented any retreats regardless of the circumstances and required an instant execution of any soldier who still attempted to back down anyway. In addition, the civilians and troops within the city would have been weakened by lack of necessary food and supplies, which had been cut off during and even before the battle truly began, both by the Germans and by the decision
how many generations didn't get born because of just the Battle of Stalingrad? 2 million men that never made children.
Many Soviet soldiers sent as reinforcements drowned while attempting to cross the Volga River, and others were very poorly equipped. And the psychological and economic importance of this city made the battle more deadly, as the Germans focused on cleaning the city and not on protecting the flanks with more men and logistics. Meanwhile, the Soviet soldiers were not allowed to retreat, and many were forced to fight, not being prepared for battle. Essentially, the Battle of Stalingrad was a deadly struggle for both sides, but it appears that the politics and policies of Stalin's Soviet Union and the general tide of the battle for a large portion of its occurrence resulted in an even more devastating toll for the Russian side.
And that is the really sad thing. You could almost argue, I mean, someone in chat is gonna have a link, that the tyranny and horror of Stalin and Hitler, or in this case Stalin, led to the victory, right? That's the world we live in, right? The world is no fairy tale. The universe doesn't care about good or evil, and his policies probably led to their victory, man. And even though he was such an evil man, he still carried that, man.